9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello and welcome to DSR. I'm your host, David Rothkopf. We're joined, as ever, by Rosa Brooks of Georgetown University Law Center. How are you doing, Rosa?
Hi, David.
And old friend, Mark Zaid, who is a national security attorney who does all sorts of constitutional issues, often representing former government officials in a variety of cases. How are you today, Mark?
So far, so good, although every day feels like Monday.
We're entering a period which, that might not be the worst that you feel on every day. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the period we're going into. I would like to have a sort of cool-headed, rational discussion about a subject where there's kind of a lot of agita in the air. We just did an episode of our podcast with Frank Figluzzi. We were talking about the possibility of Kash Patel heading the FBI, Tulsi Gabbard over at the Office of Director of National Intelligence. And one of the themes of all of this is that there seems to be within the Trump inner circle desire to make retribution a top priority. So I think a lot of people in D.C., journalists and former officials and others, are a bit nervous about this. And Mark, I know you represent some people like that. And I'm wondering what kind of advice you're giving them about how to prepare for whatever's going to happen next.
So there are a lot.
So that's my question. What kind of advice are you giving them?
Let's say arrows. Yeah, there are a lot of arrows in the incoming Trump administration's quiver that they can use that wouldn't necessarily be an abuse of the law as much as it will be exploitation of existing law to act in a way that goes beyond prior policies and norms. A lot of these steps, there's not much we can do in preparation for it, right? How can I prepare a client for facing loss of their security clearance, which the Trump administration could strip away in an instance without any due process and without any judicial review? So the best I could say is, hey, have a fallback position for alternative employment or some money saved up or a person's home that you could go to or borrow from, for that purpose. There are a few clients, very small number, and others who we could name as enemies of the Trump administration, who I literally have said, you know what, come Inauguration Day, it might not be a bad idea to be on vacation overseas just to see how certain things are playing out. Because Trump has said he wants his second administration to be one of fulfilled promises. And we've already seen this occurring with all these weeks before he even takes power of putting in place, or at least nominating, individuals who have sworn publicly to retaliate and pursue retribution against perceived or actual enemies. So we're going to take him at his word that he's going to do what he says he's going to do or wants to do, to include prosecuting journalists who may report on classified information, which has not happened before, to stripping people of security clearances merely because they've said something in exercise of their First Amendment right while outside of government, by going against whistleblowers who they don't like simply because they have reported potential misconduct. And I think it's going to be a swift action within a short period of time so that we'll see. I'll conclude this thought with saying the only thing that's actually giving me a little bit of optimism is, as much as I thought this incoming second administration was far more organized, efficient, and knowledgeable than they were the first time around in 2016, they are making so many self-inflicted errors and mistakes and demonstrated lack of judgment that I think their level of incompetence is going to override a lot of the things they can do and able to pull it off. The problem is it can be a very messy, still first steps as they take action against federal employees, former and current contractors, media, and everybody else who they don't like. So we're in for a ride, a roller coaster ride. It might not be as bad as I think it could be, but time will tell. We really can't predict it.
See, there's always a silver lining, Rosa. You're always resisting the idea that there's a silver lining. But here it is. They have bad intentions, but they may be incompetent. I'm
losing every third word that you're saying.
Really?
Riley, do you think it's me? I should try to cut off.
Now, I've had a little bit of difficulty with it, but it's coming and going depending on which one of you is talking.
Because why don't I'm just literally every third or fourth word I'm losing from all of you. And
okay, so log off and log.
Let me just quickly sign out and come back in, okay, and hope maybe that'll fix it.
Okay.
Right back.
Sorry, Mark.
No, it's a common problem. I've had this with Riverside more so than others.
Riverside is very quirky. We use it 15 times a week for different podcasts, and have for a couple of years. But every once in a while it goes haywire.
Yeah. So I do a podcast every week with, I don't know if you know Brian Karam personally, White House reporter.
Yeah, no, I know who he is.
And John Bennett, and we use Riverside, and same thing. Always is an issue, but it's not necessarily an issue on the recording side. It's an issue in the recipient side.
Okay, let's see if this works better.
Is that any better?
All of your video is a little clearer now, so maybe that will fix it. Okay, sorry, David, you were asking.
Yours is clearer too than it was.
Okay.
Before.
All right. Well, let me pick up, Riley. I'll just pause a second, and then I'll pick up. So, Rosa, what Mark describes, that's a bit of a silver lining. They may have bad intentions, but they may also be incompetent. So that lets a little of the pressure off. But I have to say, Mark's general tone was sort of have your go bag ready. What's your thinking on this?
Well, as we discussed last week, I think the only best case scenario is that they're too busy being kleptocrats and looting everything in sight to really devote much energy to going after a large number of people. But that may be too much to hope for. They certainly are showing at least some signs of planned vindictiveness. Obviously, we've already seen Kash Patel in his personal capacity have his attorney send menacing letters to our friend Olivia Troy, threatening to sue her for defamation, although the case he makes seems remarkably weak, at least from my outside perspective. So on the one hand, yes, everybody should have plans and backup plans. And I think it is really important, as I've said many times, for people to be making sure that people and organizations to be making sure their houses are in order. Organizations that think that they might be targeted by harassment audits and so forth should make absolutely sure that they've got their ducks in a row and that they are certain that they are not doing anything wrong and they've got good records and good compliance and so forth. And individuals should be making sure that, their own cybersecurity, their personal security and so on are as buttoned up as it's possible to make it. That being said, I worry a little bit, Mark. I mean, and you're a lawyer and your job is to be paranoid on behalf of your clients. And if you were my lawyer, I would be really happy about that. But I worry a little bit about, the sort of public messaging. I don't want to do anything that makes the Trumpies think we're all running scared. I mean, fuck them, if I may say that on a family podcast. In particular, I don't want them to think that people are going to start running for other countries, as soon as everything gets hot. This is where we live. This is our country too. And they may try to harass people. I think there are two different kinds of harassment. One is by, super empowered private actors, if Trump pardons all the January 6th people who've been convicted, for instance, who may decide to step up campaigns of doxing and swatting and harassment. There may be threats to people's physical safety, and obviously we want people to take care of themselves. We want to make sure that they're in a place where they're not going to be physically harmed and threatened on a daily basis. But at the same time, when it comes to what the government can do in terms of going after people, no question, can they yank security clearances? Yes, and there's very little recourse, as you know, that there can be stalling actions and so forth. But it's really tough. The nature of the security clearance process is that there are some due process rights, and you know this much better than I do. But it's an easy way to effectively sideline someone even without actually firing them or prosecuting them. When it comes to criminal investigations, though, and prosecutions, I have not completely given up faith in our court system. And I think that it's easy to investigate. It is much harder to successfully prosecute and get somebody convicted. It may be used as a form of harassment, but I think with lots of good attorneys such as yourself, with a lot of organizations and individuals pitching in to ensure that people can afford legal representation if they come under attack, if there are various forms of frivolous and harassment litigation against them, I can't see them prevailing on a large level because, 99.9% of the people appearing on the various lists of enemies from Kash Patel and others in Trump's inner circle, 99% of those people, the things they're saying that are bad crimes, they're not crimes. They're exercising their free speech rights. In fact, they're doing their duty as public servants. So I also don't want people, not because in any way I underestimate the malignity and vengeance and spitefulness of people like Kash Patel, but because I actually think that it is difficult to suborn the entire criminal justice system and the entire federal court system and the entire state court system. I'm actually moderately optimistic that although they will try to harass people, they won't succeed in getting convictions. And I think we should all be trying to convey the message that, yeah, of course, make contingency plans and have backup plans and, have your lawyer's number on speed dial, or at least have a list of lawyers you could call on speed dial and so forth. I don't want people to get too scared. Because as I said, fuck them.
I think your "fuck them" point is one we can all agree with. But let me ask you, Mark, because Rosa makes a good point.
Fuck them.
Fuck them. Yeah, that was whatever good points. But the other good point is that it's hard to get every judge and every jury to go the way they want. But isn't harassing people and bankrupting people and making their lives a living hell enough? Hasn't it already had some effect? Aren't we already seeing some media organizations pull back a little bit and obey in advance? And aren't there other avenues where they can say, well, for national security reasons, we can't tell you what we're doing, but we're doing it anyway?
Look, this is the problem. I agree that I don't want any of us to give this Chicken Little sky is falling, boy who cried wolf. It is more about just being prepared as to what might occur and what steps to take. And I know when I have said, I recommend this vacation to certain people, which was such a small number of people, and only because what they have threatened as far as literally prosecution for ridiculous non-criminal offenses, that I think it's going to happen so quickly for some people that we would get a sense. And I'm like, hey, if you're going to go on vacation in the springtime when your kid would be out of college anyway, go on vacation just a little bit earlier. But
like on January 20th at 2 p.m.
Yeah. And part of it is also, while the one good thing about Trump winning was fully anticipated political violence had he lost by his supporters, a la January 6th. I'm not expecting Kamala Harris supporters to engage in political violence, but having been the subject of being doxxed when I represented the intelligence community whistleblower, having been the subject of the president calling me names publicly and death threats and people being prosecuted for it, having been swatted at my home, I do have some concerns that even if it's not to leave the country, there are certain people who have played prominent roles publicly who might not want to be in the Washington, D.C. area on January 20th when all the Trump supporters come into town. And I hate generalizing because members of my family are Trump supporters as well, and they don't wish any ill harm on me. But we saw January 6th, and I represented a number of the police officers for the Capitol Police, the intelligence chief down there, and people who were hurt physically by folks that were there. So it's all about sort of the preparation, obviously, and looking at these worst case scenarios. I agree with both of you about I'm still hopeful about the other branch of government, the judiciary, not engaging and allowing a perversion of the rule of law. I don't have that sense in every jurisdiction in the United States, where there are certain district judges who I think would go along with whatever Trump wanted. But having appeared before many Trump-appointed federal judges, especially in D.C., I have never seen anything from them that was politically problematic. I may disagree with their rulings, but I've disagreed with a lot of Clinton appointees' rulings and Obama appointees' rulings. I do have a concern that never as before in the 30 plus years I've been practicing, where I am more concerned over the executive branch not adhering to judicial rulings, disregarding them, appealing them unnecessarily for the purposes of punitive retaliatory behavior, that if, let's say on day one, he issues his executive order on guideline F or whatever the heck it's called, and he fires countless people, everyone who worked on Jack Smith's prosecutions, everyone who worked in the Mueller investigation. And believe me, I've been contacted by people who no one knows their names, but they were on these cases as a matter of their job on the inside. All of them are fired or their security clearances stripped. Do I think that could be fought in court? Aspects of it, yes. When would that be resolved? Probably during the next administration of either a Vance administration or a Newsom administration or something like that. We saw, why is Trump not in jail? Because the judicial system doesn't work the way it should efficiently, in the same way that O.J. Simpson was not convicted because the glove didn't fit. When you put things under a microscope, there are always cracks and flaws. And the Trump people have learned masterfully to use their own term, lawfare, against everyone, because the system in the judiciary doesn't work the way it should. And appeals can be brought after appeals and motions after motions. And judges in federal court generally are somewhat loath, although some did it against Trump lawyers, to sanction the lawyers for frivolous Rule 11 type cases. So I share Rosa's hopes, your hopes that the judiciary might stick to it, but I have my doubts. And the final point you mentioned about we've already seen some bad effects. Joe Scarborough and Brzezinski going down to Mar-a-Lago after all the things you've said about Donald Trump to really go and break bread. I get it. I understand why they did it, but what does that show? The owner of Jeff Bezos not doing an endorsement for the Washington Post because he's concerned very clearly about Amazon and the contracts that they have, or the LA Times and that billionaire owner, or the notion of, as Rosa mentioned, Olivia Troy receiving the letter. Of course, actually, I was the one who received the letter because I'm her lawyer. So the letter went to me and then I gave it to her. And that is clearly designed to send a message to opponents and critics that they better shut the hell up. I mean, here it is. Can you imagine the potential nominee for the FBI director being such thin skin? Go ahead and sue me, Cash. I dare you. Probably will, but somebody will represent me, I'm sure, for free. To send a letter because someone called him a liar. All right. How many times Chris Wray has been called a liar by both the left and the right, and I have not seen Chris Wray sue anyone.
Cash Patel is very sensitive soul. It hurts his feelings very much when people are mean to him on TV.
I guess that's why he wrote a children's book, because he
Yeah.
can relate so much to being a child. That's an opinion, Cash. You can't sue me for that. Or you can, as we tell everyone, right, you could always file a lawsuit. You won't win.
You always sue.
You won't win.
Can I ask you a question, Mark? One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about are, what are the canaries in the coal mine? And so when you think ahead to the days, weeks, first couple months of the Trump administration, what are you going to be looking for to assess how vengeful they're going to be? And what would you see as either soothing signs or, this is the worst case scenario coming true?
So a lot of those assessments, right, I don't even think we can reach to a point yet, because even though the cabinet nominees are out there, we don't know who the deputies are going to be, the chiefs of staff, the general counsels. And, we talk about, let's say someone like Kash Patel gets into the FBI and he easily opens up criminal investigations. It's really easy to do, swipe of a pen. But then he has to persuade a U.S. attorney or assistant U.S. attorneys to prosecute. And I don't have any doubt there's going to be any number of them, just like we saw in the Nixon White House when he wanted to fire Archibald Cox, where people said, no, you're fired. All right, now you're the person. Are you going to do it? No. Okay, you're fired. Next person. Are you going to do it? Hell yeah, I'm willing to do it. So at some point in time, I think they're going to be able to find people, which is part of the problem. What do I expect? I expect a lot with respect to actions against civil servants and making it easier to fire them, which is not necessarily a bad thing, given I represent federal employees all the time. The process needs reform, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about termination or discipline of individuals who are contrary to the views of the administration. We're not talking about just policy differences, which there always is. I mean, we have career federal servants, and there's always a change of administration, and they still stay in their positions, and they still dutifully do their work. But God forbid the Trump folks find out that someone posted on their Facebook or Instagram or TikTok page something critical in their personal capacity and then suffer disciplinary action. That we do not see in the previously. I expect, if we think about what could easily happen, certainly IRS audits, a la Richard Nixon administration, that would be easy to do. 501c3 organizations suddenly having their tax exempt status investigated. Pensions, possibly, especially if we look at the federal employees who have spoken out, right? I represent 7 of the 51 who signed the Hunter Biden laptop letter in October of 2020, who President Trump has referenced, J.D. Vance has referenced, Kash Patel, Steve Bannon. Sitting members of Congress have said openly that those signatories should lose their security clearances and any government contracts that they had because they dared to speak out in their First Amendment capacity. I could see those individuals having their pensions gone after. Again, not anything I ever see before, but could it potentially happen? Yes, I could see people, and one reason why I was mentioning to some to go out of the country, because I could see the Trump administration ordering the State Department to shut off someone's passport, which can be done, has been done, not often done, but it is a legal avenue to do. And I would rather those people to be stranded outside of the country, where then they could have an asylum opportunity in that country, actually triggered better by the fact that their passport was shut off, than stranded inside the country and unable to possibly get to Canada, Mexico, wherever.
What, if any, due process rights do people have before the State Department, shuts down their passport? I mean, is that a discretionary thing? Would it require some prior invocation of some emergency authority, or is that something that would require some sort of process and notice in advance?
There should be a due process administrative circumstance, as well as a legal right to challenge it. In fact, the Supreme Court has handled these cases before because it has been done before to individuals. But how long will that take? What will happen in the interim to that individual? I can also foresee, and I fully expect possibly this to be done to me, we shall see, subtle retaliation for those of us who do work predominantly in representing federal employees. What if the CIA director, just to use an agency as an example, tells his Office of Security that any client that is represented by Mark Zaid, just screw him over. Just don't pay any attention. Just give them, wave of the hand, due process. Yep. Let them file their appeal, but everything will be denied. Fire them, fire them, fire them. Then I've become a liability and jeopardy to my clients, which I will not allow to happen because I will then step aside to do it. But that will neutralize me in many ways. And that would be something that either the only way I'd be able to tell would be all of a sudden, why am I losing every single case when I never lose every single case? Never win every single case either, but very few lawyers do. So there's a lot of things that can be done to neutralize folks. We talk about the media, right? And Trump himself has said that he wants to use the Espionage Act against not only the leakers of the information, which I fully support, because I don't want anyone leaking classified information illegally, but the journalists who publish it. And I've started to give presentations to major media outlets about what to expect and what steps to take about receiving information, sourcing information, not just protecting their sources, but protecting themselves, because the way the law is, as existing, there is no First Amendment defense. There is no shield privilege. If the New York Times publishes a classified leak of national defense information, the New York Times can be prosecuted. The Pentagon Papers case from 50 years ago said that. That was a civil injunction case, not a criminal case. The 4 of the 9 justices positively said, you know what, if the New York Times had been prosecuted instead of sought to be enjoined, we would have had a different, or might have had a different view. The Trump administration would just be using existing law to go after a policy difference that no one else has done before. And I would be very concerned if I were the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, AP, Reuters, Guardian, you name it.
We have 1 minute left, Rosa. Do you have any button you'd like to put on all this?
Only 1 minute. No.
Well, you could. I know you've never spoken for 1 minute, but
Never.
Let's make it a last comment.
Well, I'll do something I very rarely do, which will close on a very slight positive note, going back to your opening query and Mark's opening comments. I do think the one silver lining is, it's not much of a silver lining, that it will be hard for them to do this at scale, right? You can audit people, but having slashed the IRS's budget for years, there aren't that many people running around the IRS to do audits. You can investigate people, but you start firing everybody who knows anything. You run out of people who are good at doing investigations, et cetera, across the federal government. So yes, you can fire people and eventually get to the guy or gal who will say, okay, yes, sir. But by the time you get there in a lot of agencies, you are scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of competence as well. That doesn't give me a huge amount of comfort because, as David suggested, the sort of demonstration effect is still potentially very powerful. You don't need to go after every media outlet. If you can go after the New York Times or whatever, you go after a person or an organization that's very visible, you potentially get everybody else just decides to keep their heads down for the next 4 years. But I think it's probably important for all of us to remember as a reason not to put our heads down just because some highly visible target is gone after, that they can't go after everybody. They just do not have the talent and they do not have the manpower. So I think we should all stay strong and say, fuck them.
Well, as ever, ending it on a high note, Rosa, thank you very, very much. Thank you, Mark, for joining us. I hope we never have any cause to discuss this further, but I suspect we will, and we will invite you back, Mark. And of course, Rosa will be here every week, and we will be talking about all of these things until they don't let us talk about them anymore, at which point we'll call Mark. Until then,
I'm not in Guantanamo.
If you're not in Guantanamo, exactly. hope you're not. And I hope all of you have a good week and weekend, and join us again for the next DSR when you can. Until then, bye-bye.